following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Leanna Kersner, and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health using my top 10 sayings for checking in with your best self. This week, we're talking about the LGBTQ plus mental health crisis, why you should care even if you're a straight and cisgender person. I'm doing this week because May 11th to 17th, 2024 is the National Rainbow Week of Action, a series of events across the country urging governments and elected officials to take action for rainbow equity, equality, and address rising hate. My guest this week is Faye Johnstone, Executive Director of Queer Momentum. You might remember Faye from being featured on an International Women's Day Hershey bar wrapper. And then social media and Fox News freaked out about this because Faye is trans. Even though the federal government prohibited discrimination on the basis of gender identity and gender expression in 2017, various provincial governments and federal political parties are finding ways around this legislation, using the notwithstanding clause of the charter or other workarounds and loopholes. The Alberta government is attempting to pass the strictest transgender youth rules in the country, banning medications for trans youth under the age of 16. Yes, you might say, protect kids. This is good. Let's take a pause, though. Let's think this through. These banning medications by the government, not a medical board or a doctor, this establishes a precedent that these governments, not doctors, get to decide what healthcare you can access, with no exceptions based on extreme need or unusual circumstances. It's taking the power of medical decisions away from doctors in direct contact with patients and consultations with their families and giving it to the provincial government. Now, I take this personally. I have a rare autoimmune disease. It took 5 years to diagnose this thing. When I was first put on the treatment that worked, the doctors weren't absolutely sure that it was the correct diagnosis because, all the testing, it was an atypical presentation of something that's already rare. But the medication worked, and I got improved quality of life. My rheumatologist would not have been able to take that calculated risk in response to my unique circumstances if there had been a provincial law preventing that sort of, let's try it, see what it happens, no matter what the reasons. Because I suffered for 5 years and I got so much relief when they finally figured out what was going on. I'm not going to support any law that takes medical decisions out of the hands of doctors. I am functional today because a doctor believed me, treated my symptoms seriously, and didn't just watch and wait. They did something. When it comes to mental health, we have similar, I'll say, issues in this country. Provincial health plan coverage is extremely limited, and the current mental health care model is extremely expensive. The system is profoundly overloaded, but there are very few initiatives out there that are doing very much to prevent mental health issues before they start. It seems like everyone is stressed and struggling. So I totally get why a lot of people have no time for the rainbow stuff that's really important to me. It's cool. I get it. But let's face it. The loud fighting over these issues, especially the trans issues, is stressing everyone out. The efforts to squash transgender rights that our federal government has already gone, no, they have them. You got to give it to them. The process to even claw back rights for same-sex attracted people. All of these tactics use shock, scare, and disgust. And yeah, I have to look at this stuff to know what's going on because I have trans clients. When I see that stuff, It's medical gore. It's horror stories. It's overwhelming amounts of negative emotion. Yeah, it disturbs me. Part of me wants to just forget what I saw, just get away from all of it. But that mindset doesn't lead to better. It certainly doesn't lead to good policy, which is exactly why we can't allow those tactics to rule the day. LGBTQ plus mental health issues are a starting point to defund, delist, and restrict mental health services for everyone under the guise of protecting youth, protecting the spread of dangerous ideologies, or some other line that's already been used on Black people in the past. Yes, I went there because it's true, and I do not want to go back to those days. Every single one of us has something within us that we're scared other people will reject when they find out. We all have different methods of coping with that. Some people try to hide it. Other people get extremely obnoxious about it to the point that, get the rejection over with right away. Most people are somewhere in the middle. We hide it, and then we're sort of like, yeah, so I'm this. What do you want, right? I know I'm scared more and more to bring up the fact that I'm Jewish in a lot of places these days. I talk about it on the radio, but just meeting someone, I often don't mention it because I don't want someone to start on me about Gaza. Like, I'm honest, I don't care what side someone's on. I can't do anything about it. I have to put my clients first. I can't do a free session with someone yelling at me about something happening half a world away. I need to function during the day. Thank you. So, putting on my empathy hat, which is what we all need to do here. It also bothers me that the Ontario provincial government banned the keffiyeh scarf, even though I understand the point of the ban. Like, I get it. Okay, no political symbols on clothes in the legislature. All right, but it's a scarf, okay? It was a scarf before October 7th. If somebody could wear it before then, it doesn't have words on it. People might be wearing it for political reasons, yes, but women also wear white to invoke women's suffrage. Are we going to ban women from wearing white in the Ontario legislature? We can't ban our way out of these challenges. And yet, these restrictions, these ban it, these stop it, curriculum, all that stuff, these are our go-to legislative solutions to so many issues. Problem is, restrictions don't solve these problems. Empathy does. If all we do is restrict, we all just get less and less autonomy and less ability to determine our own destinies, and we just get stealth resentment. That doesn't work. That backfires eventually. We need to start listening to each other, even when it's hard. Even when we absolutely do not agree. Please go back and listen to the Why You Suck at Arguing episode from last week. Really, I go over a lot of this stuff. I cannot have freedom, dignity, and safety without acknowledging and validating your freedom, dignity, and safety, even when it means you're going to do something I don't like. As long as you're not violating my boundaries, I don't have to agree what you're doing on your personal time. And if I have to make a few minor accommodations, a few little changes so that everybody can be a little more themselves comfortably, I'm all for that. I'll do that, right? If we all do a little bit, things get better for everyone. If we only focus on what we oppose, we're going to drive each other further apart. Questions, comments, concerns, Leanna at nottherapyshow.com. Or if you can't spell my name, nottherapyshow.com is the website. Go there, join our mailing list, fill out the contact form, or social media at Not Therapy Show on X, that's Twitter, Instagram, and Threads. Back after this with Faye Johnson talking LGBTQ plus mental health on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Leanna Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're in the interview now. As I said off the top, we are talking to Faye Johnstone, Executive Director, Queer Momentum. Faye is part of... Faye, what's the official name of the May 11th to 17th initiative?
The National Rainbow Week of Action.
The National Rainbow Week of Action. I've seen it called a few things in a few different places, but yes, May 11th to May 17th, we are talking LGBTQ plus rights in Canada. It's a mouthful. Faye, let's start there. The whole idea of this, what they call the alphabet, that a lot of people, talk about. I don't think anybody loves the acronym, but why is it significant to have an inclusive designation in terms of the mental health of LGBTQ plus youth?
I think it's a tricky one, and it's a healthy push and pull, because on one hand, you do want an acronym that reflects the diversity of community, right? Historically, a lot of the conversations started with gay men, and then evolved to include lesbians, then evolved to include bi people, evolved to include trans people, and then it kept going from there. And so that's actually why the acronym has shifted so much, because it's reflected society's broader understanding of gender and sexual diversity. And it makes a difference to feel yourself being seen, to be named, to be included. On the flip side, I think it's important to just give folks space to go with whatever works for them. And so our best practice is 2S LGBTQIA+, but I in community just call us the gays. You can also say queer and trans people. And so it really is just, it's about intent to me as much as it is what letters you line up and what order you line them up in.
Now that intent, you're ahead of me here because I was going to get to that, but that is the center of it. And this is why you do what you do. You can expect certain questions, but there is this, like you said, a push-pull within community, but also within the general public who isn't getting the newsletters like from Queer Momentum and stuff like that. And there is sort of a collective anxiety. We see all the data, thanks to places like the Trevor Project, about young people. There is also a mental health, what do you want to call it? Epidemic, problem? I'm not sure the language here, among queer adults. So can
Absolutely.
you take through people who aren't familiar? Can you give them sort of an elevator pitch on what's going on this issue?
Absolutely. So, broad strokes and important to name up front, queer and trans people are amongst the most resilient folks in our communities. Many of us in the present day and in the past have grown up in a world that is hostile to who we are, that shames and stigmatizes us, and also treats us unequally, right? We're more likely to be homeless, more likely to be poor, more likely to be harassed, and the list goes on and on and on. And so all of those systemic factors create an environment where queer and trans people, including our young folks, our elders, and everyone in between, are more likely to struggle with suicidality, with anxiety, with depression, with eating disorders, all of those other pieces. And it really is important to make sure we know it's not that there's anything wrong with us, it's that we've grown up in a world that often teaches us that there's something wrong with us, teaches us to feel that shame and stigma. And we know in the mental health space, the devastating impact of stigma. If folks aren't able to be themselves, they have to hide parts of who they are, as many folks struggling with mental health do, it reinforces the harm. And it makes it harder for you to walk your truth, to live in this world, and to thrive mentally and in every other aspect of your life too.
Now, that's an element I think a lot of people can relate to, but we get sort of, an empathy feedback loop going on this issue. Because, everybody's got things that are invalidated. Everybody's got things that the world doesn't understand about them. Some of the things that have been thrown at transgender people are just recycled things from, the 80s thrown at Black people. We keep going through this spin cycle. Why should people who don't see themselves as affected by LGBTQ plus issues care about things like what's going in Alberta, things like the, anti-trans elements of the Conservative Party platform? What's in it for the average person?
I love this question because I think we actually silo it off a little bit too much, right? We make it a like, if you care about people, you should care about this. And that's helpful to a point. And I stand by that. Like, it is good to, I care about the experiences of people I'm not connected to, because I think we should live in a happy, healthy, good world.
Right.
But on a more cynical note, homophobia costs our economy. Homophobia costs our governments. When you have a community that is more likely to need access to mental health services, more likely to need housing support, more likely to need benefits to help with lifting folks out of poverty. All of that comes with a price tag. And all of that is also limited economic potential. If we didn't have economic inequality, which queer and trans people face to this day to a fairly significant amount, we would have more people contributing to the economy, which also means we have more taxes to take in to fund government services and less demand on those services, because a portion of community that is disproportionately reflected in those services wouldn't need it to the same degree. So there's actually a really good economic argument to make for tackling homophobia and transphobia. The other argument that I would make is that when we allow a society, a politician, or a government to marginalize a particular community, it actually makes it easier for them to do it to the next group. When we look at the attacks we're seeing on the rights of queer and trans people and the social environment becoming more hostile towards us again, it's important to name that this isn't just about us, but it's about changing what it means to be a Canadian and to live in this country. It's making it normal to bully the little guy, the kid who's a little bit different in the classroom. And it actually invites an environment where we treat diversity with hostility. And so if you believe in a more free and equal Canada, if you believe in a Canada where everyone is free to be themselves, safe in their communities, and treated with dignity, this is an issue you should care about, because the bad guys are coming for trans people also because they want to normalize governments interfering ideologically in the healthcare that we have access to. This is a coded attack to restrict abortion. When we look at the governments in Saskatchewan and in New Brunswick and Alberta that are either have or are looking to implement the notwithstanding clause to override charter protected rights, that's not actually about trans people. That's about normalizing the ability to override the rights of workers and labor unions. And so what's at stake here is so much more than just trans folks and trans young people. It's about who we are as a country and our institutions that protect our human rights and stop governments from discriminating against us and limiting our freedoms.
Yeah, I kind of stood up and took notice because I have a rare autoimmune disease. It took them 5 years to figure out what was going on. They weren't even sure. The doctor finally went, okay, we think it's this. We're going to put you on this medication. If it works, great. If it doesn't, we'll try something else. But we can't get, a clear diagnosis through testing. It happened to work. Thank God. But I put myself in the place of, what if the provincial government did not allow that rheumatologist to do that? Where would I be now? Certainly not here talking to you. I'd be in too much pain. I wouldn't be able to get out of bed. And that, go ahead. Yeah.
No, but that is exactly it, right? Like, we have a healthcare system that is meant to be led by experts, not politicians. And if there's kinds of healthcare that politicians have their own bias against, and again, I'm bringing up the abortion thing, also mental health care, also trans and gender diverse health services, like, it jeopardizes the integrity of our health system when politicians interfere with cynical, ideologically motivated agendas.
Now, part of the issue here is we do have the psychological element of people having to change entire schema of how they view the world. I do think that this is why the gender thing has caused such a big pop, that, oh my God, you want me to do all this change. It doesn't make any sense to me. I'm being forced. I'm being coerced. We hear this over and over and over again. I mean, you were at the center of a Fox News controversy over a chocolate bar wrapper. It was unbelievable. What, first of all, was that like? to be this object of debate merely for existing and being featured on a candy bar? And how do you respond to the idea of don't make me change?
I speaking of mental health, let's
Yeah.
maybe examine the correlation between having hundreds of horrible articles published about you, having people digging into your own self, your history, your family history, your spouse, and everyone else around you, just trying to find things to yell at you about or send hate mail about. And so that was like Hershey's one is an incredible experience. It was a positive one. I got to be on a chocolate bar. Trans folks all across the country, queer folks across the country, got to see someone from their community on a chocolate bar. And representation matters in a big way. It makes a world of difference to see yourself reflected in these kinds of spaces. But it is disappointing and personally still devastating to have seen the response and reaction. And to shift towards that, like, don't force me to do things. No one was forcing anybody to buy a chocolate bar. No one was forcing anybody to eat a chocolate bar that had my face on it. And so I very much enjoy this, like, I am fine if you just want to live your life and do your thing. I don't care if you are able to list off every gender identity and sexual identity term we've got around. However, you should probably still be nice to people who are different than you. You should probably still respect people and use the name that they tell you to use. If somebody comes into if I meet somebody at work and they say their name is Bob, I don't decide to name them Jesse instead.
Right.
And the same thing applies to trans people, our names and our pronouns. And so a lot of this is a whole bunch of ado about nothing. At the end of the day, trans folks, queer folks, we're not trying to force anything on anybody. We're trying to find the freedom to be ourselves. And if these like social conservative, small government folks really sat down and thought about it, they'd be on our side because we don't want governments restricting our freedoms. We don't want a society where it's normal for another individual to tell another individual how to live their life. And we all believe that it's good to probably treat people with dignity and respect. And that's really all that we're asking for.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get into the sort of psychology, the rhetoric going on here, because I think that's important for people to understand. But let's take a break first with Faye Johnstone, Executive Director of Queer Momentum. Faye is here talking to us about the Rainbow Week of Action, May 11th to 17th. Check that out, Rainbow Week of Action. Google it. You'll get connected to information and resources in your area. But when we come back, more on LGBTQ plus mental health, the social media component, here on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Leanna Kersner. I'm still not a therapist. We're still talking to Faye Johnstone, Executive Director of Queer Momentum. Faye's here promoting Rainbow Week of Action, May 11th to 17th. Just Google Rainbow Week of Action. You'll get connected to your local events and information. But before the break, I was talking to Faye about the climate, the debate climate, and Faye was saying that all LGBTQ plus activists, advocates, queer people, trans people, all they're asking for is freedom, personal freedom, and dignity. And personally, in my experience, that's inarguable, but that's not what we're seeing online. That's what they have to make people stop thinking about, right? That core values of dignity, respect, personal freedom, the ability to seek your own destiny. So they go to this very, very an emotional hijack tactic that is very hard to look at. Looking at the anti-trans stuff, materials, I'll say, I'm trying to keep my language neutral, on social media is in itself a traumatizing experience, and people walk away feeling unnerved. Now, you're at the center of that every day of your life. How, because I mean, yes, you said right off the top, LGBTQ plus people are extremely resilient, but what they are expected to deal with, what you are expected to deal with on a daily basis is going to overwhelm even the most resilient people, everybody has limits. What's your personal mental health strategies to deal with all of this nonsense?
This is an evolving question for me, right? And I think it is for many of us. And I think first, it's important for folks to recognize, the public understanding of our communities and our stories doesn't reflect our realities, right? Like so many trans people experience these daily instances of discrimination, and none of them are often like the end of the world, but they're still uncomfortable or unpleasant. So we as a community are taught to become hardened to those experiences because they're so normal to us. And then when we see these like extreme examples, these targeted attacks, it's a whole nother level. And folks don't realize that it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens to folks who are already, facing enough, who, just like everyone else in Canada, or so many others in Canada, are also currently struggling to pay their bills, to hope and dream of owning a home, and to support their families. Now, when it comes to my own experience, I have developed some, strategies that I use to mitigate the icky impact of the bad guys coming for me all the time. And a lot of that is spending time in community and dedicating time to hanging out with my pals and not thinking about any of this messy stuff that's happening in our social and political spheres. As well, it's taking the time to tap out, to let myself rest. I have the two cutest ferrets this world has ever seen, and so I
Yes.
hang out with them, and they bite my toes, climb up all over me, and there's nothing. It's off label pet therapy, and
Hmm.
it is a silver bullet.
Yeah. So you just find being a human balances out being. Do you consider yourself an activist or an advocate or both?
A little bit of both, and I do think it does balance out. I also think more like philosophically, I think understanding why the bad guys are doing it actually gives us a lot of strength, right? Like
Hmm.
they're coming for me because they're scared of the better world we're building. They're coming for me because they want to create an environment where they force my folks out of public life. And so maybe there's a stubbornness. I've got some Scottish and Irish ancestry in me. I think it's rearing its head there. But part of it to me is like, hell no, you're not going to force me out of these spaces. I'm not going to let you make me hate myself or feel shame in myself. I'm just going to keep going. And I'm going to keep building this better world because at the end of the day, their attacks are kind of petty. And we have already changed the world for generations, not just of queer and trans people, but generations of Canadians, right? Like we
Hmm.
have a world where we have more gender equity, where gender norms are not as, entrenched as they were before, where gay kids for the first time in decades are able to grow up without feeling like there's something wrong with them. And so they might come for us, but we are getting back to what matters, and that's building a better future for all of our families.
Now, you mentioned gender and gender equality, and that idea of the anti-trans rhetoric is very much about confusing the idea of identity and stereotype. And identity is a very, very important part of mental health. So, how how did you come to determine that you were trans, that transition was the correct course of action for you? And how do you define your womanhood?
I love this question because I think like, I don't think everybody wakes up and thinks, as a woman, I'm going to go make coffee. Or as a woman, I'm going to roll out of bed and put some nice work clothes on. All of us have a complicated relationship with gender because we live in a society that tells us all of these annoying, icky things about ourselves. In practice, for me, I actually like tripped into this, right? Like I wasn't the public stereotype of somebody who was born and knew from the moment I had words that I wasn't who everyone thought I was. I had a lot of shame, a lot of stigma, and a horrible self-image, and it took me years to figure out where it came from. And I didn't approach this with a single aha moment where I realized I was trans. For me, it was coming out initially as gay and feeling a bit better about myself and starting to unpack all of what was going on in my brain and my body. And then I started realizing that my gender was kind of weird and kind of different than I was expecting or than anyone else was expecting. And from there, it was just an exploration. It was figuring out, in what way for me to live hurts the least? What way for me to live makes me feel like I'm being who I actually am? And so I don't have deep philosophical answer to the like, what is a gender or what is my gender? What I have is a recognition that in the form that I am now, the person I am today, I hate myself less. I am more confident in who I am, and I am happy to live my life. And that is something I never had before I came out as trans. It was something I didn't know I could ever experience. And so, we can have the theoretical, abstract discussion around like, what is a gender and where did she come from? But at the end of the day, this is folks trying to live as their honest and authentic selves and trying to be a version of themselves that isn't defined by shame, by stigma, or by a horrifyingly negative impression of yourself.
Yeah, it really is unfair to ask individual trans people to be a philosopher and a psychologist and a sociologist and an anthropologist all at once.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And like we can turn the question on its head, right? Like how do most people know what gender they are? If you take it beyond a like, well, everyone called me this thing, and I just said, like, okay, sure. Like most of us have a kind of weird relationship to our gender. If we
Mhm.
were to sit down and try to define what it means for us to be a man or a woman, the man or woman sitting next to us might have a very different definition. And so gender is not just one thing. And that's part of why it's complicated, because these social conservatives really want to nail down a rigid definition in a box they can fit you in. But part of the point is to say those boxes ain't good for anybody.
Yeah.
Women don't benefit from a world where you have to be one way or another way. Men don't benefit from that world either, and trans folks certainly don't. So how about we take those boxes and turn them into a Venn diagram instead?
Well, we have so many pre-existing problems that spring out of defining women by the ability to have babies when everything's working properly, right? That is what we're boxing women into, and then men by proxy this idea, oh, there's something women have that we need and we have to get. It's all very, very, very unhealthy. But this is the norm, and norms can be toxic, but they're still norms, right?
Exactly. Like, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. How do you begin the conversation with somebody who is not hateful, but legitimately afraid? They've internalized these ideas that, oh, the cancel mob is coming for me. I'm going to mess up on somebody's pronouns once and my life is going to be over. It's better to just not even try. I mean, especially with non-binary pronouns, we all mess up, right?
Yeah.
It's not a big deal.
And that's it. Like, I think so. I like to bring it back to those principles that we've already talked about, right?
Mhm.
Like, everyone should be free to be themselves. We should treat others with dignity and respect. And I don't need people to understand every facet of who I am. Just like I'm never going to understand every facet of who they are.
Mhm.
And that's just how life works. That's how the world works. And from there, I would say we actually want to have those complicated conversations. How do we manage a world where the foundation that so much of our patriarchal society is built upon tell you got to be one thing or another? How do we deal with the complexities when some of these things intersect or get complicated? And they do get complicated
Mhm.
sometimes.
Mhm.
And my other piece would be the far right is lying to you about how we will react if you make a mistake.
Mhm.
I don't need people to memorize every single darn gender. I
Mhm.
don't bother to do it. And I don't sit down with everybody and say, hey, tell me what your gender is. What does it really mean to you? I don't care. You get to live your life, I get to live my life. And so at the end of the day, it's just all of us trying our best to live in an increasingly diverse world. And that is a skill that we all benefit from building.
How does somebody know if a request is reasonable? Because obviously we all mess up, right? We all have days where we're asking too much, where we're quote unquote being unreasonable. How does somebody know if something is something that is something you should accommodate? And when can they set a boundary of, no, I need a bit of time here. I need to be able to ask a few questions. Can we go a little slower?
I think we can always have like ask a few questions, go a little. So I think the baseline is like, treat people with dignity. You'll mess up the pronoun stuff, but you should try. And
Right.
trying actually matters because it's not fun for us when we're called the wrong thing all the time. And it happens to us all of the time. And so I think a lot of it is, engage with the human interaction. Like if somebody has a different experience than me or they ask for an accommodation in the workplace, I'm going to say, okay, yeah, I can help you with that. And
Mhm.
so I think it really is just like taking it on a case by case basis and doing your best to introduce practices in our workplaces, et cetera, that help us be more included, help us be more safe.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's good practice for everybody. Just try. You don't have to get it perfect the first time. Nobody's expecting you to get it perfect the first time. Faye Johnstone, Executive Director, Queer Momentum. Check out what's momentum.ca, Faye, is your website?
So for our exciting little Rainbow Week of Action coming up on the 11th, I'd encourage folks to go to www.rainbowequality.ca, and there you can learn about a rally happening in your town or community. You can also send a letter to your MP encouraging them to condemn rising hate and speak out for rainbow equality. And that's really my biggest call to action right now.
I've already done that. I personalized the letter. So it took.
Oh, you are a godsend.
it took 2 minutes. Personalizing the letter matters because it won't be a form letter. It's something different. They're like, oh, again, people put effort into this. It matters more. But yeah, it takes 5 minutes. It's real simple. And then I got your newsletter, and this is how I am talking to you right now. So you've already made some human connections. Yeah. So there's also a big list of events across Canada on the website that people can join up with. If someone is interested in getting involved, what steps should they take? What should they know going in?
So folks are welcome to send us an email if you have questions. You can reach us at info@momentumcanada.net. But if you just go onto that events page, you can find a rally near you. You can RSVP for the rally. You'll also see the organizing group listed on that rally page. And you can reach out to them if you have questions about the specific rally. But my invitation would be show up, bring your friends, bring your kids, bring your family. And that's tell the world the real story of our communities, a future where all of our kids are safe, where all of our families are free, and where we don't punch down on marginalized communities for political purposes or because we don't like diversity.
And again, it takes 2 minutes to send a letter to your MP. Faye Johnstone, thanks so much for taking the time on It's Not Therapy.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
When we come back, my final thoughts on that empathy issue that Faye and I started to unpack. I could talk to Faye for hours, but more on this in our last segment on this week's It's Not Therapy. Stay tuned. Questions, comments, concerns, nottherapyshow.com or at Not Therapy Show on your social media. Back in a bit. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back in It's Not Therapy. I'm still Leanna Kersner. I'm still not a therapist, and we're still talking LGBTQ plus mental health. And I want to expand on those having difficult conversations points that Faye Johnstone and I talked about before the break. And I want to give some tips for people who are not part of the LGBTQ plus community, but interact with members of the community. Because I have a lot of conversations with people who fear these conversations because they think they're going to say the wrong thing and get attacked or quote unquote canceled. And okay, I can't say that never happens. People have tried to do that to me. But these instances of somebody jumping all over you are fairly rare. I have them because I have a lot of fraught conversations, and I find they're more likely to happen online than in real life. So if a situation with a work colleague or a family member or a friend, if it's one of those, in a face-to-face or voice conversation, as long as you show them respect, it'll probably be okay. If it's on social media, it's best to just stay out of it. It's not worth it. You gain nothing, and there's a potential to lose things, right? So for those face-to-face or voice conversations with somebody you know in real life, you know what? These work for everything, but I'm focusing on those conversations. Here's a few tips to make those conversations go better. Establish common values and intents off the beginning. Then, when the conversation starts to get challenging or upsetting, reset by restating those commonalities. So, we're colleagues. I really respect your work. I don't want to upset you. I want to find a way to work this out and get along because I value your contributions greatly. Things start to get heated, repeat that. It's validating the other person, and it helps the conversation return to a calmer baseline. Don't make statements assuming intents. Oh, if I could take one thing out of communication, it would be this. If you really think the other person is trying to trap or trick you, end the conversation. Think about it. Is this a person who would do that? Probably not. If they are, and it's a work thing, might be something to have HR involved with or a third party. Give to get. Offer concessions. For instance, I'll try to use your correct pronouns. This is new for me, though, and I'm going to make mistakes. They're not intentional. Please don't jump on me for mistakes. Don't insist the other person gives you something first or goes first. That's creating a lose-lose scenario, meaning whoever blinks first is submitting, instead of a win-win scenario where you offer something. It's a good faith gesture, then the other person can do a good faith gesture. If you're just waiting for someone to blink, it's very possible nobody's going to blink. Ask questions instead of making statements, and be really open to the answers. Like top 10 phrase, listen twice before you talk once, right? Don't assume the other person is coming from a place of calm and or strength. These conversations are vulnerable for everyone. The fewer assumptions you make, the better the outcome will be. Do you see the pattern here? Yeah. Another thing, don't hold the individual you're talking to responsible for something you saw online or in a video or in an online video. And don't present it like the thing you saw online is the normal or most common opinion. Social media, even news media on the TV or certain newspapers, these are places of extreme opinions. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, not norms. If you bring something up you saw online and someone says, that's not what I believe, take them at their word. As we said with Faye, don't demand someone define a technical term. A person shouldn't have to be an expert in biology, sociology, psychology, and linguistics to be treated like their feelings are valid. And I say this as somebody who has to know a pretty big cross-section of biology, sociology, anthropology, psychology, linguistics, philosophy, and so on and so forth to do my job. Most people don't have the time to dig into this stuff, which is I do it, and I do this show. Most people are just trying to live their lives. Don't quiz them on terminologies. In general, don't make demands, period. Again, you'll see a trend here, hopefully. Demands, contentious statements increase the temperature. Questions and discussions of feelings bring down the temperature. Usually there's some tough feelings involved. And because there are some tough feelings involved, do set boundaries. Top 10 phrase, other people don't have to like your boundaries. They do have to respect them. It's totally fair to say you won't accept being called, for instance, bigoted, homophobic, transphobic, right? When you're sincerely attempting to understand, you might have been told some things that are homophobic or transphobic, but your intentions are not that. And so you get the right to say, please don't call me that. I'm trying here. If you do that again, I'm going to end the conversation. If they get to be called what they want to be called, so do you. Same rules apply. Accept that no one has all the answers. Another theme. Faye modeled this beautifully. She's an advocate, and she doesn't have all the answers. There are no right or wrong answers in some of these things because different people are going to want different things. What works for one person will not work for someone else. And that's true of all identity groups, races, religions, anything. Star Trek fans. I'm a Star Trek fan. Star Wars fans. You know, we don't all think the same. We don't like all the same things. Some people like Jar Jar Binks. That was a joke. Let's move on. Remember that your rights end where another person's begins. Your religious freedom or your scientific knowledge does not give you the right to demean someone else. Every religious text in existence has that as a fundamental principle. Faith doesn't give you the right to be cruel. Your degree doesn't give you the right to be cruel. There are professional ethics. You can be the smartest person in the room and still lack wisdom. And if you're insisting that your sincerely held beliefs give you the right to hurt somebody else, knowingly hurt someone else, that's going to make you look like a hypocrite, especially if you're objecting to someone else's quote unquote ideology on gender or anything else. Again, try to stick to I feel statements instead of judgments. That comment hurt. Instead of you're intolerant leads to better results both ways, right? If somebody's calling you intolerant, say, please don't judge me, just tell me that hurt, right? It leads to better results. I find overall in these conversations, it helps to focus less on rights and more on dignity. Less on freedom, more on respect. Yes, freedom can be a common value. But if you're free to say anything you want in a conversation, then the other person is too, and things go to you-know-what real quick. These skills, these tips, will help you in all areas of life, not just interactions with the LGBTQ plus community. So it's good to learn them and apply them wherever you can. This is a good time to learn in a, relatively new territory. But yeah, all these tips I just gave you help with everything, not just gender, not just sexuality. It's just that anything involving identity, especially anything involving sex or body parts, it gets personal and vulnerable very, very quickly for everyone. And if we treat everyone like vulnerable humans with feelings, then everybody's going to get treated like a vulnerable human with feelings. And I have to treat this show like I'm out of time now. Questions, comments, concerns, Leanna at nottherapyshow.com. Nottherapyshow.com website, at nottherapyshow on social media. Thanks again for Faye Johnstone for her candor and her time. She squeezed me in. And until next time, check out Rainbow Week. Check out what's going on in your community, even if it's just to learn. You don't have to participate, just to learn. Read the websites. Because remember, their crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you, and your crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you. See you next time.